Right, so that's Sinead Taffadinish, that's it recording now. So I just usually really start by asking people, is it still going? Because I got a new phone. Do the exit out of it. No, it's still going. I'm not familiar with this phone yet.
Yeah.
I start by asking people really their background with regard to language and, how they came to be speakers, or are they native speakers, or, what was your contact with Gaelic medium education and so forth.
Okay. So my first language is Gaelic. Although I was born down near Glasgow, brought up in Inverness, my father's family were from the west coast of Lewis, and they spoke Gaelic. My father was brought up in Gaelic, so we were brought up in Gaelic. My mother wasn't a Gaelic speaker, was learning in school, and for her that was very much an immersive environment, going to live with him and his parents for a while. So yeah, the language of our household then, and still, is Gaelic. I can't speak to my mother in English unless somebody else is in the room. I can't speak to my sister, my brother in English. It's embedded in how we grew up and how we behave. So that in be growing up as sort of one of the Gaelic speakers in Inverness. This is in the 1970s, when I moved to Inverness in the 1970s. And yes, there were Gaelic speakers around, but very much a minority. And certainly a minority of the kids I went to school with. I have a strong memory of going to my nursery school in a church just down the road here, mornings. I'm being left alone with all these children and thinking, what is going on? What is this language we're speaking? Because I was the eldest in the family, so I'd had more limited exposure to English. The time my sister came along 2 years later, I was probably passing English on to her, and her brother, another sort of 6-8 years down the line, we passed on English to him more. But as I was the eldest, I think I was like a rabbit in the headlights at this nursery school. But Gaelic, a very strong part of that. And, the question about did I attend G&E primary or post-primary, there was no such thing. So I went to university in 1984, and that's when the first GME primary schools were started in Scotland, in Glasgow and Inverness. So no, I missed all that.
You just missed it by a few years, right. And were you involved then or you were obviously aware it was growing when you were in university? Were you involved in the campaign?
To be honest, no, I wasn't. And the campaign wasn't a public campaign in that sense. It was a parental campaign. And I was your average 18-year-old away off to Glasgow. I mean, it wasn't themed up authority to that kind of stuff. And my degree wasn't Gaelic related. My degree was geography. But my first job after university was working with Reading and Gale and BBC Reading and Gale. So Gaelic speaking journalist in Inverness here for 2 years. Basically, I had a 10-year career in Gaelic broadcasting as a Gaelic journalist, radio and television. So that kind of brought me back into that side of things. And yes, I became aware of the growing GME, Gaelic Medium School movement. And the other there was a preschool movement, Corna the Scolaíocht was underway at the same time. So yes, obviously became aware of that then, although I wasn't directly involved myself.
Right. And you mentioned the equivalent of the Neenry. Would it be called Neenra play school?
Scolaíocht, or a Crolican is another word we might use. Then I guess it's a difference between a playgroup and the nursery school.
Right.
And so a Scolaíocht.
Right. And did they, because in Ireland sometimes they were founded to support the already existing Gael school, or sometimes the Gael schools sort of emerged out of them. Was there a relationship like that with them? Or
to be honest with you, I can't say with any authority whether that is the case or not. I think it is, but I would probably defer to somebody else who maybe knows that better than I do for sure. although we had GME from the 80s, fairly sure we did not have nursery schools. So they were separate entities. They may have been complementary, but I think they were separate movements until sort of the developments of early years and preschool much more recently, when now there are better links and there'll be preschool provision along with a GME school. But that's a more recent thing. I think the previous relationship was more informal.
Right. Yeah, similar to Ireland, really. And would you have been reporting on the development of GME or Gaelic as well? All sorts of Gaelic issues. So you would have had your ear to the ground.
Very good. In fact,
some of the stuff.
Although I'm now the chief exec here, I remember standing in the garden there with a TV camera up on my shoulder, interviewing the then chief exec of Comunn Gaelic. So yes, we were very conscious of that. And if I get my sort of chronology right, this would have been, I suppose I started in about 88 through to 98. And that was when Comunn Gaelic was pressing for the growth of GME, for more secure status for Gaelic and these kind of things. They would have had annual Gaelic Congress meetings and politicians involved, making the case for more investment. And I would have covered those on occasions. I can think of at least 3 or 4 about that I was along at those. So yes, aware of what was happening.
And at that time, was that one of the primary things the Comunn Gaelic was pushing for? I mean, the country in Ireland, it fights on many fronts, I suppose. Is it similar, or was that the touchstone campaign, or was there...
Comunn Gaelic at the time, although it was, as it is now, a charity and a private company, was de facto the development arm of the government. So it was created in 84 out of, I think, a desire to put a bit more zip into Gaelic development. There were other organisations a bit more historic, a bit more backward looking, but I think in the 80s there was a thought that we really need to sort of up our game a bit. So Comunn Gaelic did work on several fronts. They're promoting education, delivering youth activities, working on translations and tourism projects. So it's quite a broad scope, and a big part of it, we're pushing for Gaelic broadcasting as well, but a big part of it was also this idea of a Gaelic Language Act or some kind of legal underpinning for the work that was taking place. And that work was happening through the 90s until about 2000, when Comunn Gaelic had a very authoritative report authored, and it probably sowed the seed for the Gaelic Act in 2005 and the stuff that's followed since then. Whether any of that has actually made any material difference is a different question. But yes, Comunn Gaelic was a big part of that. What happened then, to finish off the potted history, in 2005, the Gaelic Language Scotland Act was passed. And still remains, although there's talk of a new bill, it still remains the sort of underpinning legislation. When the Act was passed, a new body was set up called Bord na Gaelic, the equivalent, I think, of Forest na Gaeilge in Ireland. And it's a public body, and the strategic functions and role which Comunn Gaelic had was lifted up and moved along to Bord na Gaelic. And then Comunn Gaelic, I wasn't around in this job in 2005, kind of struggled. It was left a bit. I don't think anybody had really given a great deal of thought to what Comunn Gaelic would do. I came along in 2010, and since then we've taken much more of a focus on youth work, sort of supporting the kids who are in GME, because there are many faults in GME, I think, and our work is designed to try and complement what's happening in the schools. And when I say that, I don't want for a second anybody to say that I'm critical of what the teachers are doing or what their schools are doing. I'm not. But it's not enough. And I think what we try and do in a small way is support what's happening in the schools.
Very good. And what way do you do that then? Is it through youth clubs and after school activities and all of that.
Just that. So we have, I would say there's 3 parts of Comunn Gaelic really. One is Comunn Parent. Now I don't know if you're speaking to Maggie Wentworth at all.
Up to Lewis and Innes.
Okay, so Lewis and Innes work for Comunn Parent, and Maggie is their boss. So Comunn Parent it's part of Comunn Gaelic, but it's more distinct. For Comunn Gaelic itself, we then have our Immerston network. This was based on the Welsh Menthraíocht movement, language initiatives, and they are essentially nowadays local officers based in a specific geography, working closely with specific schools. Mainly, we would focus on junior secondary and upper primary, because what we're trying to do is give the kids a bit more of a sort of personal enthusiasm for Gaelic, and trying to encourage them to make that transition from primary to secondary. Because when they're 5 and their parents put them into GNE, they haven't got much of a say in the matter. But come primary 7 and into secondary, they do have more of a say in the matter. And then again from secondary 3 to secondary 4, from junior to senior secondary, again we get drop-off. The number of kids going into the system at primary 1, it's much bigger than it is coming out to the end at that secondary 6.
What are some of the challenges around getting parents to send them to secondary schools and progress away through Gaelic with that?
And there's 2 things. I think one is that the parents maybe start getting cold feet because they think, oh, well, we did it first for primary. Primary wasn't that important. Now this is serious. They need good exams and we need to get to university and so on. So there's a bit of that. But actually, the other part of it is the kids themselves. By the time they're 12, they have a voice. They know what they want to say. They have their own opinions and so on. So I think it's both of those things. I think the COVID pandemic probably heightened parental concerns because all of a sudden they were cast into the role as teachers and parents at home learning, and they're not Gaelic speakers. The vast majority of them are not Gaelic speakers. So how do they help their children with their homework? So the GNE pupils' exposure to Gaelic over the period of the pandemic was markedly down. And teachers will tell you that that was really obvious when the kids came back after that, despite what the schools tried to do, despite what we tried to do, doing online activities and sessions and so on, because the kids' exposure to Gaelic was drastically reduced. So I think it's a complicated picture. And then another thing which we don't really have, the growth in GNE has been strong and steady, and Scottish Government supports new provision and so on. But increasingly we're getting to that sort of point where maybe we got there quite a while ago, where the resources we have just can't keep up with the demand. So we haven't got enough teachers, and we haven't got enough people to do the support roles, even if the budget was there to recruit them. So I think it's a bit of but of course it's like a sacred cow. You really ought not to criticise GNE these days because you'd be cast out. We don't really seem to want to engage with the real questions. And as I said earlier, I'm not for a second challenging the principles of GME or what's happening in the schools. I just think if we're setting ourselves an objective that says that these pupils are going to be the future generations of Gaelic speakers, then we're not meeting that objective. And to do so, we need to put much more resource into those schools to give them a much wider range of extracurricular stuff. Bottom line, much more exposure to Gaelic language and more social use of the language. And to answer a question you posed earlier, that's what we do. We try and do, although we do not have blanket coverage of Scotland or even of everywhere there is a Gaelic medium school. So our local officers do try and do a local programme of activities with the kids based around what the kids want to do. It's trying to, build their enthusiasm. It could be anything from a film competition to, beach tidy up to a baking thing to anything. I don't care what it is. as long as the kids want to do it and it's in Gaelic. That's the main thing. We're trying to give them that affinity for the language. So that's one side of what we do. We have on a small scale, kind of what you guys do in Ireland, we have our summer camps. 2 camps just yet for 8 to 12-year-olds, 30 kids in each camp for a week. Just activities, But for those kids who come from English-speaking households, my apologies, for those kids who come from English-speaking households, it's a real challenge for them to all of a sudden having their breakfast in Gaelic and doing their activities in Gaelic and having their tea in Gaelic and so on.
Where are they based? Are they in the
camps? The camps, it depends. They have moved around over the years. We like using a place in the islands, but unfortunately, it's a factor of that particular place. It's had issues with management and standards are going downhill and budget, and the local authority, Comunn, advised schools not to go there because of safety concerns. So this year we were at a place in the mainland, just about 15 miles north of Inverness. So the benefits of going to the islands are, A, you're taking kids from Glasgow and Edinburgh to the islands. They may never have been there. The bus driver probably speaks Gaelic. The person who runs a boat trip for us speaks Gaelic. The person cooking speaks Gaelic. So it's much more immersive. And it's part of the Gaeltacht. It's part of the Gaelic heartland. So we'd like to continue using the islands, but we need to find a venue, and there aren't any at the moment. And then the other part of the thing we do more recently is outdoor education. We created a new offshoot, a new activity called Sport Gaelic. And these guys, that's 5, when you walked in, there's climbing ropes and helmets and all sorts. But they are off now. Our team of instructors are off with 9 teenagers doing a paddleboard camp expedition. Quite an intense language thing, but really high quality. Expensive, but high quality. The kind of thing those kids will remember for the rest of their days. So that's what we try and do, is activities aimed at taking the Gaelic out of the classroom and much more social use for these kids. But we really are scratching the surface of what needs to be done if we had more resource.
What's the geographic spread of it now, the activities you do, and the spread, I suppose, of GME? Is it in the central belt? Is it grown in the cities, or are there places being...
But both, actually.
Both, yeah.
The challenge in... So an interesting... We have... the Western Isles has got a decent smattering of GME, but of course the Western Isles are struggling with depopulation. So they've been closing schools rather than expanding, changing. But recently they came up with a Gaelic first policy. And that the idea behind that was that by default, every child enrolled into school would go into GNE. I don't think they were quite ready for the backlash by parents who said, no, we're not, we know. And they didn't expect a number of parents who signed or said, no, we're not doing that. We want the child to continue or to enroll in English medium. I don't think they sold it well enough.
That was transitioning from primary?
No, that was going into primary. So whenever they went into primary, if you enrolled your child in primary, Gaelic was default. GME was going to be default.
In the Isles?
In the islands.
Right. And there was serious opposition? Or?
I don't think it was quite opposition. I think parents just said, no, we're going to opt out of that. We would like to continue in English mainstream to a higher proportion than I think the Comunn was ready for. I'm looking at the map behind you. I think that way, but there are lots of GNE schools in the Highland Council area, which are the biggest geographical one in Scotland. Then there is Glasgow and Edinburgh. So Highlands, Argyll, Glasgow, Edinburgh, the Western Isles, and bits around the Central Belt. Less penetration in the east coast of Scotland, so Aberdeenshire, Fife and Dundee, there, but in smaller numbers. The last census, I think, has shown that the number of Gaelic speakers is split 50-50 between the old traditional speaking areas and the Central Belt. That's out-migration from the Gaeltacht areas into the cities. So GNE is split pretty much that way. But of course, because the numbers of people in the cities is much higher, the growth in GNE is driven in urban areas. Even if every child in the Western Isles went to GNE, it's from a kind of I compared to what's happening. So Glasgow is now, it's about to have its 4th GME primary school. Edinburgh has 1 dedicated school. I think they may be talking about a second. They have a GNE annex to one of the secondary schools. Glasgow has a Gaelic only secondary school. Well, it's not Gaelic only, but in name, it's a GNE secondary school. So the big growth is in the Central Belt. And maybe 20 or 30 years ago, lots of those kids would have had island links. There would have been kids of the diaspora.
That's what I was going to ask there. It's not like that specifically anymore. It's linked to people, new speakers are coming in.
It is. It is, but part of the problem, and one of the questions we don't really want to address. Let's say 10 years ago, people might have levelled a criticism of GME, that it was a kind of middle-class hobby. It was, parents, well-to-do parents, wanted to give their kids that little bit extra. Couldn't really care less about Gaelic, but, let's get the kids in there because, all of that. And there was lots of research published about that time showing the cognitive benefits of a bilingual education. So that was then. It maybe is still the case to a degree in some places. But the head teacher of the Gaelic nursery in Glasgow will tell you that no, they're dealing with all the same issues, the same enrolment problems of any other large urban secondary school at Glasgow. So a bit of a mixed bag as far as that's concerned. Some parents are definitely still going for the educational benefits, even if they have no personal affinity with the language. In other respects, there will be some who have a family link. It's a bit of a mixed bag.
Interesting. And I heard there is a bit of controversy around giving priority or Gaelic speakers or children from households who have Gaelic speakers aren't given priority into schools that are over.
That controversy has arisen in Glasgow. I don't think whether it's been an issue anywhere else. I don't think any of the other local authorities are really facing the having to cap numbers like Glasgow is. So it's probably an issue which is at the moment specific to Glasgow because the demand is so high that they're having to cap it somehow. And yes, they are not, as I understand it, the last I heard, they were not prioritising. They were not prioritising children from Gaelic-speaking households. I think they ought to, and I think practically that the head teacher might say the same thing. But Glasgow City Council's policy is quite open and equal, and they don't want to make those distinctions.
Right, interesting. You mentioned the Act earlier. What exactly is enshrined in the Act in terms of GME? Is it?
Not very much. The Act doesn't talk about GNE. GNE comes into the Education Act. So it's a different legislative platform. So I think Gaelic education in some form has been around in the legislation since the 1890s. 1870s Gaelic was left out, and people will say that was a hammer blow to Gaelic in the heartland communities because there was no Gaelic provision. Then in the 1890s, they rectified that, and throughout the 20th century, there was some element of Gaelic teaching in schools until the 80s when Gaelic medium education took off. So the legal underpinning for education is different from the Gaelic Language Scotland Act. The Gaelic Language Act is a relatively toothless and it creates Bortna Gaelic. It gives Bortna Gaelic the power to force to require other public bodies to create Gaelic language plans. It charges Bortna Gaelic with creating a national plan for Gaelic and with advising ministers. It's a pretty bland
stuff around signage as well, maybe.
The signage flows from that in the sense that it comes from the national plans and the public plans that sort of hang from the Act. Signage is one that can be really pushed and resisted. It's a funny one, signage.
Well, some of them I was coming up today, some of them I think they're better than the ones in Ireland. I really don't like the ones in Ireland with the italics, because it makes it look symbolic and sort of a bit of flowery thing on top.
Yep.
But the ones here, they look like Catalonian, that they're equal.
It's only when you get to a certain part of the road. Yeah, absolutely. So when you got to just before Dalwhinnie, you cross into Highland Council, and that's where you crossed into that area, and that council's policy was Gaelic, so the signs would then start to become bilingual. Further south, you wouldn't have seen it, I got it. Yeah, so it depends on the geography. And some routes, if you go into the islands tomorrow, you'll follow the route to Albain, I guess. And that's our main trunk road serving an island community. So the policy is for bilingual silage Jutland.
It's very patchwork, really.
It's not Scotland wide. No, not yet. And it's like any, if I think it can be argued that that's a sensible tactical move. To relate to that point I made about GME, we haven't got enough teachers. We haven't got enough support staff. Why are we rolling it out wherever parents want it? Why are we not saying, sorry guys, for the next 10 years, which you can't afford to do this, for the next 10 years, we're going to focus on existing provision. Sorry, but that's the way it has to be. We'll put our resources into the existing provision to make sure that works well, to make sure that we do create better Gaelic speakers, and then they can go to college and become new Gaelic speakers than new teachers. And, in that, whether it's 10 years or 20 years, we need to be a bit smarter about having a specific long-term objective for Gaelic. So the Welsh was 1 million by 2050. Ireland has 500,000 by...
2.25 million, I think. Not going to be that.
No, but it's a specific target.
Aspiration, I suppose.
It's a specific target. And I think if we have more Gaelic speakers in more places, well, how many more? 10? 20? What does more mean? It's not defined. More opportunities and more... Well, how do you define there is nothing? And the flip side of that is very vague. It allows government to sit in its hands and say, yes, we're doing it. We're meeting these targets because they're so rubbish. So we need to have a specific target, even if it's aspirational, because the point of a specific target is if you mean it, you then drive specific activities towards that specific target. And for those specific activities, you need specific funding. Unless you have that target, all the rest of that falls away. And that's the situation we have at the moment, is that we have a very bland, very vague set of aspirations, and that allows government to be vague and non-specific in terms of activities and funding.
So what do you think is needed to sort of specify these things and set out targets? I mean,
well, government in the past, if you go back to before the Act was drafted and put up as a bill, there was a committee of experts formed by the then Labour government, I think, chaired by a fellow called Alec McPherson. So they produced a report which said, yes, there should be an Act, there should be a Gaelic development body, and blah, blah, blah. There was a second committee in 2002 to review this. There were politics involved. And they said, yeah, we agree. There should be an Act, there should be a body, and it should have a budget of 10 million a year. Borden and Gaelic have never hit 10 million a year. Their budget was lower than 5 million. It's flatlined for a bust. Since 2006, it's flatlined. Well, it was aesthetic in 2008, and then nobody really got much of a sense of enthusiasm. I was going to say something earlier in response to one of your questions about why parents weren't enrolling their kids. And I think a part of that is that we have these vague, undefined, cosy objectives. Gaelic does not have a high enough profile in Scotland. We do not have the First Minister standing up like you might in Wales to say positive things about Gaelic. Our previous First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, did not like Gaelic. They did not learn to like Gaelic speaking. Oh no, she would go to the lecture in Somerostak and she would make the right noises, but the truth is she was not a fan. Because the agenda of social inclusion and the issues of urban central Scotland were the priority. Well, what was happening in something
Sort of metropolitan,
yeah,
centralised mentality.
I think so. And I think we need our new First Minister to stand up and be more positive. Because if Gaelic is seen to be more of a positive thing for Scotland as a whole, it will drive other changes. It will drive the lottery to prioritise Gaelic funding, or as one of its criteria. It will drive other charitable foundations to make Gaelic, which is not at the moment. We get by in a shoestring, but the shoestring is not going to put Gaelic on a firmer footing for the future. Just isn't going to happen. So we really are at this existential crisis at the moment. And as I don't know how, if you know Crahur, who you will know, Crahur Deca, and the team from Sileshire, when he talks about the symbolic nature of the activity that's taking place, I have a lot of sympathy for that argument. I don't tend to think that our activity is symbolic. I think our work with young people, I think any work with young people is always a good thing. I think if the kids are in this system, we owe it to them to do the best we can for them. But I think that we have real challenges in terms of the priority afforded to Gaelic in Scotland. And that, trickles down to individual confidence, to kids' confidence, to parental confidence, to local authority support, to public body support. The lip service of public plans and all the rest of it, I don't really know if it achieves as much as it could.
And in terms of the schools being founded, that's parental committees, is it? And would that national discourse have an impact on that as well? Them coming together.
That's a slightly different. So there is a statutory guidance on Gaelic education, and it's being I understand it's being revised at the moment. And that statutory guidance tells local authorities that if there's a demand, if 5 parents come to them or 5 children are to be enrolled, the local authority is duty bound to look at the case for establishing GME as far as it's a small number. Yeah, it's a very small number. But they would want to see 5 and then 5 and then 5. That's some sort of, pipeline. The local authority does not have to go to the second stage of the investigation. The local authority is not legally bound to create it. They're just legally bound to look at it. So I think the next iteration of the guidance, I think, is intended to be stronger. And then we're back into this debate. What if it is, and you create a right which you can't service? So I think that I sort of forget, Karen, what the your question there about where that came from, but the establishment of GME, it is parental demand that drives it, but it's not like Belfast, where that was a committee that set up their own school and employed their own teachers, and that it's not like that. Once they get the demand for a school, and the local authority, if it wants to and if it sees the demand, it takes it on as part of the state school structure. So the same terms and conditions for the teachers, all of that kind of stuff, plugging into the same secondary schools. So it's not a sort of as more independent as I understand it is in Ireland, or at least used to be in Ireland. It's not like that. It's a GME is absolutely rooted in the public education system.
Well, it's gone like that in Ireland now.
Okay.
That was the recent changes that happened, maybe to take power away from parents. I don't know, but it's interesting. It's interesting all right to the start off here within the education system. It's gone like that in Ireland now, but and then I suppose what was one of the questions I had? Yeah, what's the sort of biggest advance, I suppose, in terms of I
saw this question,
yeah,
and I thought, this is a difficult one. I don't think we are advancing right now. I think the establishment of GNE in the mid-80s was a big advance. That was a big movement. That was a big moment. 1990s, we had the establishment of Gaelic broadcasting and giving it a platform, and the way that's moved to the BBC. And so that's a really positive step forward in terms of raising the profile of Gaelic. And I don't think we've had anything since then to match the establishment of GME or Gaelic broadcasting. And that's not to denigrate Bord na Gaelic. They do what they do with the resources available to them, and they are hamstrung by a lack of resources. So potentially the establishment of Bord na Gaelic could have been an important milestone moment, but I don't think many people would look back and say it really has achieved that potential. I'd be fascinated to go back and speak to the people on the Macpherson Committee and the Meek Committee and say, this is what you argued for. This is what you really thought you were going to get. Are you happy with what's transpired? I think lots of people would, if they were honest about it, would question it. And at the moment, I don't think we're going forward. I think we are stagnating at best, possibly going backwards, while creating this illusion, this veneer of activity. Oh, there are new schools happening. There are more schools. Yeah, very good. But are those schools actually creating a new generation of Gaelic speakers? No, they are not. And then meantime, at the same time, the communities, and again, the Seilshavuk is strong in this, the use of Gaelic as an intergenerational language in the heartland areas, it's declining all the time. So with two things happening, which are not necessarily under the radar, but people don't really want to engage with those things.
Yeah. And it's a question of how to turn that goodwill of parents sending their kids to these places, maybe turn that symbolism into something concrete in the public. And
we need to resource that. So listen, we need to resource that. So we don't have, for example, in Scotland, I don't know if we have in Ireland or in Wales or anywhere else, we don't have a Gaelic youth strategy. There's GME, and that's about the sum total of it. There isn't an outlined strategy for the young people beyond the GME system. And the GME system is not going to create Gaelic speakers, because all they get is your academic topics in Gaelic. They don't get anything else. And they go off to playground and they speak English to their pals. Gaelic is not the lingua franca of the playground at all. So I think we need to accept where we are and accept that a crisis needs a crisis solution and come up with something a lot more cohesive, comprehensive, resourced, and so on. I think it can be done. Don't get me wrong. In all this, I sound really pessimistic, and I can be. I don't think it's impossible at all. I really don't. I think we certainly have enough speakers and enough of a community and enough political support to build on. But unless we get the resources to do that, we'll not go any further forward.
I must read that book you mentioned, or the book of Soilsha there, the vernacular crisis, was it?
The Gaelic.
Was the vernacular community? Yeah, did they lay out sort of radical solutions, or was there things around resources? Or
so their solution, or Crachur's solution, was that the rooting Gaelic development in the public sector, and this church of public sector, quasi-public sector officials, and I guess they would count me and Comunn Gaelic in that, because we take our money from the public purse, despite the fact that most of my staff are based in the community anyway. But they see this as not being effective and not going to do enough. Their answer was to have a community-based approach, so to create a new URAS, a new trust, the Gaelic Trust, and to have that to be democratically elected from communities in the heartland, and presumably to be supported and resourced to do that work. I'm not convinced about the relative merits of doing away with one body to create another one. I have to say that just and as a general principle. But my biggest worry about that is that if you're looking at the Western Isles, and I don't know if you've been before, but
No.
you've taken, they are really, really, really fragile communities. They've got a crap ferry service, they've got a poor air service, unemployment or employment opportunities are few. They've had massive in-migration from, relatively wealthy retirees from England and elsewhere. Well, even if they're not second to us, even if they're moving into communities, they're not Gaelic speakers, so they get elected to community councils and the parent council and so on, and the Gaelic strength gets diluted. So people are struggling just to get by. And the same people who are on the grazings committee might be on the parent council. They might be the local community councillor. They might be on the such and such or the housing association or whatever. There's real issues, acknowledged issues with sort of volunteer burnout, with that kind of thing. All of those things, and then you want them to really take on Gaelic as a priority as well. I'm really doubtful as to whether there's enough resilience in the community when they're struggling to survive at a time of, cost.
The material questions are going to be
Kids leaving, depopulation. I struggle to see that idea would gain enough traction.
I saw there was a protest over the ferry a couple of weeks ago.
There was, and that's a fairly unusual thing. That was in South Uist, and that is a very, very unusual thing in the Western Isles. It's a very unusual thing for Gaelic. I speak to Cian and Prodica.
Oh yeah.
Déanann, the other one.
All right.
Cruchur. So I know those three through Ellen and so on. And I look at the pictures of the marches in Belfast and I think, different planet. If somebody was a big Gaelic protest in Edinburgh, 30 people, oh, you're doing well. It's a cliquey pressure group. And that, again, that's not to diminish them. It's just not a big public issue.
Same in the south or in the Blaine, yeah.
As in?
Well, compared to we look up at the north.
Yeah. But
we need that on the streets.
That's the history of the community identifies in different lines. So I think it'd be great if there was more community involvement along the lines of the sideshare recommendations. But I think there's still merit in supporting that community and the public funded, the public directed work. But it needs to be resourced. And we need to have a clear set of objectives. What exactly are we trying to achieve? When we talk about Gaelic development, do we mean Gaelic in the sense of, walking in the back door and chatting to people in a cultural sense? Or do we mean a system of verbs and syntax and spelling, which the kids in Edinburgh and Glasgow have? Because they don't have a Gaelic culture. So what exactly do we mean? What are our clear objectives for Gaelic development? Okay, there's your clear objectives. How do you reach that objective? What tools do you need? Okay, where do you buy the tools? How do you create simple structure? But to bring that back to GME, and let's have another example. How are we going to measure the success of GME? I don't know how you do this in Ireland. How do we measure the success of GME? How do we know?
Proficiency. Language proficiency, you mean?
Well, that's the question. We don't do it. We haven't identified a yardstick. The only yardstick we have is growth in numbers. That shows you that GME is successful because it's growing. No, it doesn't. That might be one part of your matrix, but it's not the most important, because the question isn't how many kids go in, it's how many kids come out and how competently will they come out, and we're not looking at that. Are we scared to look at that?
Interesting. I had my questions up there. I think there's one about do you have any links? Do you have any links with the other? You mentioned already the North. You have links.
LA.
Comunn.
So yeah, LA is the European Language Equality Network, and I first engaged with LN before Brexit, when we were trying to set up our outdoor education side of things, and really struggling to get money to do that. So I kind of reached out to David Hicks, who's the LN secretary, member of staff, to see whether he could point me in the direction of any language grants or grants from Europe that might help us do that. But I've stayed engaged with LN, although, to be fair, I think the focus on rights, which it has quite strongly, really sit well with what the issue in Gaelic or Scottish Gaelic, because we could have all the rights you like, but unless we've got the resources, maybe 20 years down the line, we might be having a question about rights and the right to bilingual signage all over Scotland, or the right to Gaelic medium education, whatever you want. But that rights, at the moment, I don't really see that rights will make the biggest difference here.
And in terms of resources, well, Ellen, the EU, I mean, post-Brexit, there's been a loss of regional structural funds and stuff like that. Is that gonna?
Well, I think that happened long before Brexit. The Highlands and Islands used to benefit from Objective 1 because of the sparsity of its population. I was working for the Enterprise Agency at the time, and the line we always used to say was that the Highland region, the Highland HIE area, is as sparsely populated as Finland. Very, very big landmass, small numbers of people. So lots of the road, the A9 you're driving up earlier on today, there would be lots of EU money in that. The road up to Aleppo, lots of EU money in that. New ferry terminals, EU money. But then as more Eastern European states joined Europe, the Objective 1 money went elsewhere. And for a while we benefited in transitional funding, but that's all stopped now.
And that was pre-Brexit.
That's pre-Brexit. Yeah, that was just to do with the expansion of Europe and changing priorities. So there may have been pre-Brexit little pots, which I wasn't familiar with, to do with youth engagement or, visits between young people, and you might have been able to get small but significant sums of money from those pots, but they've obviously, they were drying up anyway.
Were they? Yeah, it's one thing interesting, because I know Welsh were very animated about that around Brexit. They were sort of condoleezza, and they were very adamant that they wanted to keep those regional funds.
Well, we weren't getting that many regional funds, as I remember at the time.
So, you've already answered the last question that were there about.
I was going to say about learning from those. I do speak Tiki, and I do meet. I was at a meeting in Carntocher last year from the various Gaelic plan officials. That Mulholland Scott organised that meeting. Our outdoor education guys have met with the Earth in Wales, because they've got a massively bigger and longer established system in Wales. But we can learn from that. So there are opportunities to learn from that, and I would like to do more and more of that. But resources. I'm always going to come back to resources to allow us to do more of the stuff we would like to. Sorry.
No, you'd already answered the one about the impact of GME schools on pupils, but I suppose you're definitely focusing in on resources. So is that a centre periphery thing? Is it an anti-Gaelic thing? Is it a neoliberal thing where they're not funding communities anyway, or is it all of the above?
I don't know. Is it anti-Gaelic? We do see anti-Gaelic sentiment very, very definitely in Scotland. I don't look at it because it's too depressing, But if you look at something that appears in the national media about Gaelic, and you were to go to that national media Facebook page and it, vitriol. It is absolutely, and if you were to substitute Gaelic for Asian or race or colour or gender or whatever, it would be actionable. Whenever the last Lord Carlow was doing a review of hate crime in Scotland, and we submitted, Board na Gaelic submitted and said, you really, Gaelic deserves. It said it's a minority, and didn't take it on. Because it's not ethnic and it's not, it's not race and it's not gender. So we don't have any protection like that from sort of hate crime. So there is anti-Gaelic sentiment. I don't know, though, if there's indifference and a lack of understanding. And we wrote to, Comunn Gaelic wrote to not every MSP, just before the recess there, to say, look, we engage with government and it doesn't go anywhere. It's like pouring your angst and your comments and your criticisms and into a black hole. So I'm not going to do that anymore. We're just going to kind of lay MSPs. And I've stated to myself, even if we write to the MSPs every 3 months or something like that, they'll get fed up with it pretty quickly. But say, something still hasn't happened. Oh, look, we still haven't got what we need. Oh, no money yet. I just keep on chipping away because it's through the official channels, it's not going to happen. Because there's too many other funding pressures. But if nobody's making the case for Gaelic funding, and I don't see anybody else doing it, then, you were not going to get anything. If our voice isn't in there, we're going to get absolutely nothing. So the board budget, I mentioned this earlier, the board budget reached 5 million a year in about 2008 or 2009. And it is flatlined at that.
With inflation now.
So it's effectively halved. And if their budget is halved in real terms, then the money they have, most of Comunn Gaelic's funding comes from Board na Gaelic. Then it means we're not being able to get funded. And I can't go to the lottery because they don't see Gaelic as a priority. And I can't go to Scottish Government because even if they say Gaelic and youth as a priority, they'll find something else that's more important. So really, really hard to get funding for Gaelic because it hasn't been afforded sufficient profile and importance within Scotland. As I say, I want to finish with saying it can be done. I mean, I am not so pessimistic that I think we can't do something, but we absolutely have to have a clear plan, a clear set of nationally, not Donald MacNeill's opinions, but a partnership approach. Let's have a nationally agreed set of Gaelic objectives, clear targets, clear strategy, adequate resources or tools identified, and the money to do that. If we do all that, it can make a difference. I really believe we can. But if we don't get that...
Einzig goeie was.
The
I don't know. That was brilliant.
I was sticking to the BBC.